So Stoicism is an ancient school of philosophy originally founded in ancient Greece by a figure known as Zeno of Citium. It has been passed through the Roman world and then has actually endured to the present age. Now, I love Stoicism. I read the Stoics all of the time. I have made videos about the Stoics. I even try to implement Stoic practices into my life, like embracing voluntary discomfort, regularly reminding myself that I'm going to die and trying to make the most of my life because of that. I've taken Stoic wisdom and tried to apply it to my own life. And you might be interested in Stoicism too, but the best way for you to learn about Stoicism is not through a YouTuber like me. It's not through podcasts. Really, it's through reading books. It's by reading books by the Stoics and about Stoicism. So today I'm going to go through the kinds of books you'd want to read if you want to learn more about Stoicism. The first category of books that you might want to read are like modern introductions. These are books that are written by modern writers. The ones I'm going to talk about are all by living writers. These books will introduce you to the key concepts, and a lot of them really emphasize how you can take Stoic teaching and immediately start applying it to your own life. Now, there is a huge market for this. To be honest, I think the genre is a little bit flooded. If you just go to Amazon, type in Stoicism, look at those books, you're going to see that there are so many books that are here to teach you about Stoicism. So it can be really difficult to pick the right book. If we're looking for books that are clearly written, are intended for people without much of a background in philosophy, and also are books that don't compromise on what the Stoics actually said, like they'll actually teach you about Stoicism, then really I think there are two clear winners. The first book would be Massimo Pigliucci's How to Be a Stoic. Pigliucci has written a number of books about Stoicism. You could check all of them out if you wanted, but I would suggest that you start with this book if you're going to read anything by Pigliucci. It has a really nice framing because it's actually about how Pigliucci has taken Stoic teachings and applied it to his own life. Pigliucci is an academic philosopher. He's also a scientist. He's interested in ancient ethics and ancient concepts, and he's trying to make those relevant to us. And again, he's not watering down what the Stoics actually said or taught. There are nice historical details in that book where you can learn not just about Stoicism, but about the Peripatetic school, which are the followers of Aristotle, or the academics, the followers of Plato, or the Cynics, or the Skeptics, or the Epicureans. He'll teach you a little bit about all of this, and he even introduces you to practical exercises that you could do as you kind of learn more about Stoicism. The second book, and probably the gentlest introduction to Stoicism that I know of, is this book by John Sellers called Lessons in Stoicism. John Sellers is the chair of Modern Stoicism, which is an organization that tries to bring Stoic education and principles to a wider audience. They're a really cool organization, and Sellers has been a part of it, I think, for about as long as it's existed. This book is really short. My copy is under 80 pages, and it really gets to the heart of things. Sellers is going to teach you the core concepts of Stoicism, and he's going to present them in such a way that honestly you could start thinking like a Stoic and even practicing Stoicism the next day. Pick up this book, read it in an afternoon. Maybe you decide you want a slightly more thorough introduction, then you could look for Pigliucci's book if you really wanted to, or you could go on to our next category, which are the primary Stoic texts. And just a note, I love the cover of this book. I think it looks really great. It's sort of my ideal design style. So publishers, take note. This is a good cover for a philosophy book. So if you've read one of those introductions, you understand a little bit more about Stoicism, and you're definitely ready to just start reading the Stoics themselves. I just really want to stress that if you are interested in ancient philosophy, Stoicism, really any philosophical topic, a modern introduction can be helpful, but it is never a replacement for reading the primary text. So always make sure, as you're exploring this topic, that you're actually referencing the Stoics themselves. Don't just rely on someone else's summary of Stoicism. So the four most famous Stoic writers are Zeno of Citium, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus. Zeno of Citium is actually the founder of Stoicism. If you want to learn more about him, you can pick up this very old book called The Lives of the Eminent Philosophers. It's a collection of short biographical stories about famous philosophers from the Greek world. After you learn about his origin story and everything in that book, you will learn about the books that Zeno wrote, and unfortunately though, none of those writings have survived. So we can't read arguably the most important Stoic, the founder of Stoicism. We do not have access to any of his writing. Now, many people would suggest that you begin with Marcus Aurelius. The book that's referenced there is the Meditations. The Meditations is a set of notebooks or journals that Marcus kept, and he's always kind of addressing himself throughout. I believe that the Meditations is an important book. It's an inspiring book. If you are interested in Stoicism, it is necessary reading. However, I don't necessarily recommend it as your first book about Stoicism. The main reason for that is actually the fact that Marcus Aurelius is already a convinced Stoic. And he's not here to teach you about Stoicism. In fact, he's writing this to remind himself to live more like a Stoic. So he is applying Stoicism to his everyday life, but he's taking a lot of the background Stoic assumptions for granted. And you will see very few arguments for instance, why pain is not a bad thing. Since Marcus never gives more than a hint or an outline to those arguments, I don't think the Meditations really is the best book to start with, though you're going to want to read it. So out of our 4 famous Stoics, we have Epictetus and Seneca left. Epictetus is a personal favorite of mine. I love the handbook, which is also called the Enchiridion, or the guidebook, or the guide. You'll see a few different names for the text. I think it's spectacular. It's a collection of Epictetus's writings that have been put together into a kind of collection for rules for life. Epictetus's handbook is the book people like Jordan Peterson wish they could write, where it is straightforward, practical, and philosophical wisdom that you can actually put into place in your everyday life. And most people who are interested in Stoicism nowadays, that's what they're looking for. So the Enchiridion by Epictetus is a fantastic place to start. If you're going to buy a book by Epictetus, I highly recommend one edition in particular, which is the complete works. It's edited and translated by Robin Waterfield. There are links to all these books down below. Waterfield also edited and translated my preferred edition of the Meditations. I think for popular Stoic translations and things, Waterfield really is a very talented scholar. I trust his work and I recommend it to others. If you buy the complete works and you read the handbook, which is not very long, you could then move on to the discourses or the fragments, which is just collections of what we have left of Epictetus's writings or what his students wrote about him, really. So buying the complete works is actually a very economical option. I believe this work is about $20 US. You get multiple works contained in the same volume and you can read them at your leisure. One reason, by the way, that I like to emphasize Epictetus so much when I talk about Stoicism is that I think some people have a distorted view about who Stoicism is for. Because Marcus Aurelius is the famous figure that we all think of, we kind of equate Stoicism as a philosophy for emperors, for rulers, for men with power. Epictetus was actually a slave. The name Epictetus literally means like bought or acquired. He was an educated slave and eventually he was given his freedom and then he devotes himself to philosophy. But he was actually studying Stoicism even before he was freed. And Stoicism really is not just for the powerful. It's a really remarkable philosophy in that a Roman slave and a Roman emperor can both find inspiration there. So when you're reading the Stoics, don't focus just on Marcus Aurelius. Make sure you read some Epictetus. Now, out of our 4, that leaves us with Seneca. Seneca was a prolific writer, so you're probably not going to read everything that Seneca wrote, but the work that you're most often looking for is sometimes called Letters to a Stoic, or the Moral Letters, or Letters on Ethics. The first edition I ever bought of Seneca's letters was this edition from Capstone. I cannot recommend this edition. This edition has 65 letters in it, but there are actually 124 letters in this collection. There's an edition by Penguin, which is very affordable. I believe a hardback is about $15. I would recommend that edition over the Capstone. But the edition that I recommend the most is actually from the University of Chicago Press. The book is actually published here as Letters on Ethics. The University of Chicago Press has been doing something really remarkable lately, where they have been taking the complete works of Seneca and trying to translate them into English or collecting authoritative translations so that someone who does not read Latin very well or at all could read these and have like a reliable edition to read and to cite. If you are looking for reliable editions of Seneca, the University of Chicago Press is doing a great job. Now, you do not need to buy all 7 volumes of Seneca's complete works. I own them because I like Seneca, but you might want to buy a few of these books. Letters on Ethics is one of them, but then there are other collected letters and essays that are a little more scattered that are found in a few more volumes from the University of Chicago Press. The titles I recommend there are Anger, Mercy, Revenge. The second one is Hardship and Happiness, and then finally a volume called On Benefits. In Hardship and Happiness, you will find an essay called On the Shortness of Life, which I consider to be essential Stoic reading. So even if you don't go and buy the University of Chicago's edition of Seneca's works, you need to find a copy of On the Shortness of Life, and you need to read it. Anyone who's interested in Stoicism who has not read that essay, I would just say that you are missing out on one of the great treasures of Stoicism. Now, let me make a case for a less famous Stoic that you might want to check out. We don't have a lot of the writings of Gaius Musonius Rufus. But we have some of them, and they're all contained in this book called That One Should Disdain Hardships. Musonius Rufus was actually the teacher of Epictetus, which is a remarkable little historical fact, and we have at least a decent amount of what he said. This book is divided into a number of chapters. Each chapter is on a specific theme or sometimes answering a question. It's very well structured. You could read this again in an afternoon, or you could do it a little bit more slowly because you want to devote yourself to one chapter per day or something, and then you'd get it done in about a month. There's a chapter on why you should prefer simple living. In fact, Musonius Rufus actually argues that the best profession for a philosopher would be to be a farmer because you could still do philosophy in the fields. Musonius Rufus argues for the necessity of philosophy for kings and for peasants and for men and for women. And at the end of this collection, we just have collected sayings from Musonius Rufus that were preserved by his students. There's a little line from this book that I love, I want to share with you. Musonius Rufus writes, "If one accomplishes some good, though with toil, the toil passes, but the good remains. If one does something dishonorable with pleasure, the pleasure passes, but the dishonor remains." And this is such a great example of Stoic wisdom put into a fairly pithy statement. There's just so much wisdom packed in this little book. This is the translation by Cora E. Lutz. Again, links are down below if you want to see these specific editions. Okay, so maybe you've read one or two of the introductory books and you've been working your way through primary text. I now want to suggest some more advanced reading. By talking about these books, we have left the realm of beginners. We are no longer talking about books that beginners should read, or even books that most people interested in Stoicism have to read. But if you are really devoted to learning about Stoicism, these are 3 books that I think are very useful. My 3 recommendations are The Roman Stoics by Gretchen Radom-Schills, The Morality of Happiness by Julia Annas, and The Therapy of Desire by Martha Nussbaum. The Roman Stoics is a book about the social aspects of Stoicism. It really pushes back against this idea that Stoicism is just about individualism, about a kind of rugged individualism. And so Radom-Schills is actually talking about the role of community, of parenting, of marriage, of friendship in Stoicism. And it's a really nice bit of insight into Stoic philosophy. And I think it corrects some popular misconceptions about Stoicism. Of the 3 books I'm talking about right now, this is the shortest one. The next 2 books, The Morality of Happiness by Julia Annas and The Therapy of Desire by Martha Nussbaum, are not exclusively about Stoicism. What they are is about ancient ethics in general. Stoicism features heavily, though. Both of these books can be useful because they're going to let you understand the terms and concepts that ancient ethicists were thinking in and were using when they were trying to explain anything. And the Stoics are ancient writers. They inherit a lot of their moral categories from the Greek world. Sometimes they get a little translated into the Roman world. They're not always obvious and clear to us today. Either one of these books should help you along the way. These books are difficult, they are long, they will be slow reads for most people, but it's also a great introduction into how contemporary philosophers are talking about Stoicism, talking about skepticism, cynicism, Epicureanism, Aristotle, Plato, all of that. It's a great little introduction that could help you get started if you want to dive deeper into philosophy.